Right, now here's a lesson, or the first of several lessons, where we're going to look at animals, and particularly farm animals that you would very typically get in a landscape. And what's more typical of a landscape animal than cattle? But it's the sort of animal, cattle, horses, sheep, in fact most animals tend to worry a lot of artists because they're unsure about getting the proportions right, the legs, the size of the belly in relation to the head and the rest of the body, and so on. And one of the most useful little tools I've come across, which I discovered when I was doing the watercolour course, was a measuring device using no more than a simple piece of wire. And that will help us to measure the proportions of the animals. If you remember, we were talking about using ovals and squares and circles and what have you to measure people and animals and other items. Well, this is where it comes into its own. Let's take the proverbial back end of the cow, for example. If we open this out to about the width of the cow there, that can become a standard measure, because when we open that out to that width, what we also find is that if you go 1, 2, it's pretty much twice that width, which is twice the height of the cow. In other words, this is almost a perfect square. You could draw it as a perfect circle if you want to get you going, but you can see it as a square and then a smaller square to get the right proportions for the legs. If we have a look at this animal here, then we've got, let's say we take the depth of the belly at that point, which is about that. We've then got 1, 2 lengths from the rear of the cow to the back of its head is pretty much the same as the depth of its belly at the widest point. We can draw that roughly as a circle or an oval, and then take an oblong like that. We can draw an oblong like that, another oblong there like that, another one like that, and perhaps we could have that as a sort of a triangle. You don't have to draw the full triangle, but we've got yet another triangle there for the cow. But you can see with both of these animals, if I take that photograph away and then we put that down there like that, you can see particularly with this, instantly we've got the proportions pretty well spot on, so that we know that when we come to draw the more realistic outline of this cow and put the little bits in that are missing, then keeping roughly to those proportions is going to give us a cow in that picture in the correct proportions. Right, you can see building on these rough outlines, I've sketched them down onto the painting surface, onto this watercolour paper. These two exactly as we've done before, and here we've used the examples of this calf. Here we've got some Highland cattle here. Now let's have a look at the back end of the cow. Really, we've got, it's a very angular sort of body, but we've got this little bit of the round belly sticking out slightly here. We've got the back legs really like that, the udders at the back, and there's a little bit of the tail there. And again, really all we're drawing is a couple of fairly, from this view anyway, fairly bandy legs that take us up, and this large high protruding backbone here that gives the cow its very distinct bony angular appearance. And all of a sudden, without any difficulty at all, you've got the cow. This one is in some ways even simpler, because all that we're needing to do here is to really smooth out and just define, there's that angular back end again, just define some of the shapes in the cow. And then we've got these very relatively short but very powerful, very stubby legs of the cow, and there we are. We've got a very simple, very straightforward cow. Okay, now you can see that I've just started off by actually putting some off-white paint over the shape of the cow, and that's really to give us the base colour of the white part of the cow. Now this one, while I've got the brush out and I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll put some dark patches over that in a second, but this one is the proverbial how now brown cow. So I'm just mixing together some raw umber to ready brown. Again, notice I'm painting the shape of the cow and I'm painting the brush strokes in the same direction as the way the belly of the cow goes, like that. Okay, you can see how easy that is. Now that's dried off a little bit, so with a mix of raw umber and I think some phthalo blue, that should give us a nice good solid black. Again, don't worry too much about exactly trying to replicate the patterns on the photograph. If you have a look at the cow here, there's a bit of a pattern that comes down its tail slightly like that. The top part of the tail is black and there's a little bit of pattern somewhere like that. And what we'll do is we'll paint the cow's face, and that gives us a nice opportunity to outline the cow's face and ears against the side of this back leg here and the side of its body, so it helps to give us a nice light against dark. Right, you can see that having added the black to this cow here and the brown to this cow here, I've now gone over with the same off-white colour as I've used here. That's given us effectively the basic blocked colours. What I'm going to do now is to start adding a little bit of subtle highlights, and to do that, to start with, I'm going to actually start with the dark. I'm going to start with the raw umber, a little bit of the yellow ochre and perhaps a little bit of cad red, dark enough to give us some subtle darks and shadows for the muscles and underneath the flanks of the beast. So it's like that, and it's giving us that sort of effect, and the start of that sort of effect there, like that. A couple of starters for the roundness of the body and a little bit of a squareness of the backbone there. Okay, that's fine for that. Now I'm going to get some light colours in, and again, if we just add a little bit of lighter paint there, now you can see, there we go, there's the belly, the roundness of the cow starting to emerge. We'll put a bit of shadow using some slightly darker grey. Let's have a look. We'll use a little bit of ultramarine blue and white, and a little bit of the raw umber. So now you can see how that's suddenly, very quickly, very easily started to develop some nice deep shadows. Okay, we're just starting to work a little bit on the tail of this cow, and I'll just lighten that side of the tail just so it's slightly highlighted. It's still black, but I just want it slightly defined, and particularly I want this part defined because that's going to be very prominent at the top of the angular backbone of the cow, and that's certainly going to be highlighted by any sunlight. So we'll just paint in some of those, or in fact paint out some of those darker areas, just so we can get a little bit of the highlight in. Now, same here, the light highlights have sort of settled back in slightly onto the cow, so, or the brown cow anyway. So I'm just going to just give us a little bit of highlight over the backbone like that. Okay, And before we do anything else, we'll use a bigger brush and just bring in some shadow on the ground, just to switch the sunlight on you. And you can see that, take it up into there, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't it doesn't have to be too well defined. You've got a bit of a gap and you've got these shadows going basically to the legs. Okay, I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to fill in these other animals as well very, very quickly in exactly the same way as we've done here. Right, well, you can see now that I've taken these little sketches quite a bit further, in fact virtually to completion. You can see that I've also added a bit of sky for each one and a little bit of greenery, really so that the cows can actually be anchored to the ground, and they're anchored particularly because we've got a shadow. Now this one here, which was only a sketch previously, I've taken that to completion, produced in exactly the same way as these two beasts here. The only reason I've done this one is to give you an alternative view. Where you've got a 3/4 front view here, you've got a 3/4 rear view there. This Highland bull here, I get dry brush effect with lights and darks and medium reds, browns, gives you this lovely shaggy effect. And we've finished off obviously where we've got these very long and very distinctive horns. This little fella here, who's kneeling down in the field, the main thing I want you to notice about this is the hooves for the back leg, because the back leg folds as he sits down, it folds forward. So this hoof here is actually from his back leg. I've painted that side of his knee and that side of his knee a medium blue grey for the shadow. Here it's much whiter, so you've got this nice contrast of light and dark. So there we are. There's some cattle to get you going to populate your landscape pictures.